Hi, I'm Anna. Welcome back to Books on the Go. I'm here today with my Women in Translation Readathon TBR. As you know, August is Women in Translation Month, and this was started by Magda Szabo, and she's really good to follow on Instagram at ReadWit, ReAdWit, and on Twitter, and lots of inspiration there. And it's just, she started it in 2014 and it's just gone from strength to strength. And it certainly has inspired me to read more books by women in translation. I always used to think I read widely, read lots of translated literature, but in fact I had on my shelves mainly men. So this has been really good for me. And in the last few years, Matthew Sharappa and Kendra Winchester and Jennifer from Insert Literary Pun Here have hosted a readathon. So I'll link their channels down below and we'll get straight into the prompts. The first one is a book published by an independent press. So for this one, I have Every Fire You Tend by Sema Kaygusuz, translated by Nicholas Glastonbury, and this is published by Tilted Axis Press, which is one of my favourite publishers for translated literature. I think it was founded by Deborah Smith, who was the translator of The Vegetarian by Han Kang, among other books, and she's amazing. And so I've found through Tilted Axis lots of books set around Southeast Asia or India, and they're just the ones that come to mind, but countries where I haven't previously read literature from, if that makes sense. So it's been a really good publisher for that. Not as Eurocentric as some of the other books that I've tended to see or read. And so I'm looking forward to this. I don't know anything about it. It says on the blurb, I think it's inspired by the events in 1938 when the Turkish Republic launched an operation to erase an entire community of Zaza-speaking Alevi Kurds, and then it's set in modern-day Istanbul with an unnamed protagonist. So it sounds really interesting. So I'm really looking forward to that, and it's been on my shelf for a while, and I've been looking forward to getting to it. So this is the time. So that's Every Fire You Tend by Sema Kaygusuz, translated by Nicholas Glastonbury. And then the next prompt is read a genre title. So that could be science fiction, romance, crime, and I've chosen crime. This is not the book, but this is Snare by Lilja Sigurðardóttir, and it's translated by Quentin Bates. And this is the first in a trilogy, and it's she's an Icelandic author, so it's set in Reykjavik, and I've read this one, and I've just ordered the second one, which is called Trap. So Trap will be the book that I'll do for the readathon, but I don't have it yet. So this is the sort of first one in the series, and it's really good fun. It's centres on Sonia, who is going through a messy divorce and wants to get enough money to be financially secure to win back custody of her child, and finds herself inadvertently in a drug smuggling sort of crime operation and becomes a really good drug smuggler, but doesn't want to persist with that. But of course she's ensnared into this web. And so this book, Snare, is all about her trying to extricate herself from that. So I won't say what happens, and in fact I can't exactly remember. Oh no, I do remember how it ends, but the second one, I believe, is partly set in Florida and partly set in Reykjavik, and sounds really fun, with the same characters, Sonia and her girlfriend Agla, and possibly some of the criminal characters as well. So I'm looking forward to that one. And so that will be Trapped by Lilja Sigurðardóttir, translated by, who was it? Quentin Bates. But I'm just hoping it will arrive in time, because of course deliveries have been delayed. I had to order it online. I couldn't find it at my local bookstore. So we're in the hands of the postage gods at the moment. But that's she's really good, really fun author, and she's been described as a mix of Icelandic noir and Mexican telenovela, and she was raised partly in Mexico and partly in Sweden and Iceland and Spain as well, I believe. So a really interesting mix. And the next prompt is a book published in its original language before the year 2000. So I have two for this prompt. The first one is All Our Worldly Goods by Irène Némirovsky, translated by Sandra Smith. And this was originally published in 1947, and this translation by Sandra Smith was published in 2008. So quite a long gap, and I think the reason for that is Irène Némirovsky, as I'm sure you would know, was a very successful author in her day. She was born in 1903 and she wrote almost a novel a year in about the 1920s and 30s. She was a Ukrainian but had fled to France in 1918 from the Russian Revolution, and a Jewish woman. So she married a banker, lived in Paris and had two daughters, and then was this very successful novelist. But then during World War II, during the German occupation, they had to flee Paris and they lived in a village in France where she continued writing. And so tragically, she was then taken in 1942 to Auschwitz, and she died in August 1942 at the age of 39. And her daughter had boxes of her papers and didn't read them, thinking it would be a diary, it would be really upsetting to read, and then discovered in the late 1990s a manuscript of a book that became Suite Française, which was written and set during the German occupation of World War II. So quite incredible, a contemporaneous novel set during that time, and an incredibly elegant piece of writing. And this, All Our Worldly Goods, was the one she wrote just before that. So she started this in 1940. It's hard to believe. But this is set from the 1910s through to 1942. So it's during the First World War in a village in France, and then also a seaside town where they go for the summer, and in sort of the north of France. And then it goes through the 1920s and the sort of unsettled 30s, when they start to see that war is coming and they're dreading it. And she describes it like an impending death, that they know that it's coming, but they just want one more day or one more month, and they keep living their lives, but in the shadow of this event that they can sort of see it unfolding. And so it's one of those books, because we know what happened, I suppose, it's really poignant, and also knowing what happened to Irène Némirovsky, it makes it really poignant to read. But just a beautiful, beautiful book. So I recommend that. And Amanda and I just did this on the podcast. I have to finish editing it today, and we're uploading that shortly. So stay tuned for that one. And we both just loved it. So in fact, you don't even need to listen, because I can tell you the outcome of the discussion. We really loved it. So that is All Our Worldly Goods by Irène Némirovsky, first published in 1947 after her death, and then translated in 2008. And I think after they discovered Suite Française, which then became a huge bestseller in its English translation, they then have been releasing all of her other work in English translations. And so that's been a joy to discover all of her work. So that's the first one for that prompt. And the other one, which I did also just read last week, is a winter book by Tove Jansson. And this is a selection of short stories, partly from A Sculptor's Daughter, which was published in 1968 and also translated a year later, I believe, but partly stories that were written in the 1970s through to the 1990s, and then first translated in about 2005, 2006. So this is just a wonderful collection. I really recommend it. Tove Jansson lived from, I think she was born in 1914 and died in 2001. And she's known, of course, for the Moomin stories, which I just adored growing up. And if you haven't read, you must read those. But she's also written this work for adults, which I've just discovered. And I think some of it is being translated now for the first time into English, as in now, meaning over the last 10 years or so. And it's just a joy to read. Her writing's really dry, it's unsentimental, it's very spare and funny at times, but also incredibly luminous and beautiful. And she does really notice things in nature, and she really plays with her imagination and lets you use your imagination as you might have done when you were a child. So it's very, very joyous in that way, and constantly and very creative. And this has a lot of stories about her drawn from her life with her parents, who were both artists. And so it just gives you such an insight into living with artists and what they prioritise and what matters, and all done with this great sense of humour. And yeah, it's just delightful. So that's A Winter Book by Tove Jansson, various dates, but some certainly published for the first time in translation after the year 2000. So they are the main prompts. And then there are some bonus prompts. And the first one is from Kendra, is to read Breasts and Eggs by Mieko Kawakami, translated by David Boyd. And I was going to say I have read this. I bailed on this. We did it for the podcast. I did it with Amanda. She really liked it, and lots of people have loved it. So please do read it and let me know what you think. Don't be put off, but I just didn't get on with it. However, because we were doing it for the podcast, I was reading around Mieko Kawakami, and I fell in love with her as an author. And she's a feminist icon in Japan. She's interviewed Haruki Murakami. She challenged him about his portrayal of women in his books, which I love, and she's just fabulous. So I really love her. Didn't love the book, and I really wanted to. So it's one of those dilemmas. But in any case, a really good one to discuss. So I'd love to know your thoughts if you've read it. That's Breasts and Eggs. The second bonus prompt is Matthew. His book is 7 Years of Darkness by Jiyoung, translated by Kim Chi-young, and that's a thriller. So I actually should have ordered that one instead of Trap by Lilja Sigurðardóttir, but anyhow I didn't. So I would love to know if you've read that one. I haven't read it. I love a thriller, so I will just have to add it to my list, I think. The next one is Jennifer, is The Door by Magda Szabo, translated by Len Rix, and I have read this one. This is I think Hungarian novel set in Budapest, I believe, although I don't know if it's named, but I think it was set in Budapest, and I read it a few years ago and I really liked it. It's very rich, quite slow moving at times, but I really remember the protagonist, who's an older woman and a very singular character. And even though it's quite slow moving, there are some very sharp observations and an interesting story. So that's The Door by Magda Szabo. I am also reading two others that I'll mention quickly. One is Kim Jiyoung, born 1982. That is by Nam-Joo, translated by Jamie Chang. And this one you might have heard of because it was a huge bestseller in Korea. And so it's had a lot of publicity since being published in its English translation. And it's really good. I read it yesterday just in one sitting practically. It's a very quick read, but really fabulous. I think Amanda and I are doing this on the podcast as well. So stay tuned for that one. And another Korean book. I seem to be having a Korean binge at the moment, but this is Untold Night and Day by Suah, translated by Deborah Smith. And the translation, as you can imagine, is exquisite. It's a almost surreal story with a protagonist who works in an audio theatre, but then that theatre's being shut down, and she and her director go for a walk at night time. I haven't got to the walk part yet. They're just having dinner, but it's really, really good. And Daisy Johnson described it as a Lynchian triumph, by which I'm assuming she means David Lynch, whose work I love. I'm such a huge Twin Peaks fan, and it does have those surreal elements and almost dreamlike aspects to it, which I think that's what she means. And in fact, if you like Daisy Johnson's work, I think you would love this because there are some similarities. So I really like it. I don't know if everybody would, but so far, I'm only part of the way in, but so far, really enjoying this. And it's incredibly different and original, which I like. So that is Untold Night and Day. So that's a little bonus read that I've been doing and hoping to finish that soon so that I can get on to Every Fire You Tend, which is my Tilted Axis book. So I'd love to know if you're reading anything for Women in Translation Month. Let me know, and I will report back soon once I've finished all of these books that are on the list, and I will see you then. Bye for now.